Saint Justin Popović, one of the most important Serbian Orthodox theologians of the 20th century, developed a profoundly defined and uncompromising stance toward Roman Catholicism, Protestantism, and modern ecumenism. His theology was rooted in the conviction that the Church is the divine human body of Christ, and that anything which separates man from Christ, anything that replaces God with man, constitutes a spiritual fall and heresy. At the very center of his thought lies the idea of the God-man, Christ as the heart of all existence. When man, whether through institutions, reason, philosophy, or ideology, becomes the measure of faith and truth, a spiritual distortion occurs. This shift, which Justin calls anthropocentrism, is, in his view, the common root of all Western deviations from true Christianity, beginning with papism, continuing through Protestantism, and culminating in modern ecumenism. In his famous work, The Orthodox Church and Ecumenism, Popović presents perhaps his most widely quoted assertions: that papism, Roman Catholicism, is the first Protestantism, and that ecumenism is the pan-heresy, the common name for all false teachings and spiritual errors throughout Christian history. When he declares that papism is the first Protestantism, he does not mean that they are historically identical, but that in papism he recognizes the same principle which later found its fullest expression in Protestantism: the replacement of the God-man by man. In Roman Catholicism, according to Justin, man, the Pope, has taken the place of the God-man Christ through the dogma of papal infallibility, through the idea that one human being can stand as the head of the Church. That act, he writes, marks the beginning of a spiritual revolution in which man becomes the measure of truth rather than God. As he famously stated, papism is truly the first and oldest Protestantism, for in it man replaced the God-man. Man, the Pope, became the infallible teacher, the head of the Church. For Justin Popović, both papism and Protestantism are two aspects of the same spiritual fall. They both represent the replacement of Christ with man, the transfer of authority from the divine to the human. Papism manifests this in the form of a centralized institutional authority, while Protestantism manifests it through the autonomy of the individual conscience and reason. From papism, he writes, was born Protestantism, as a son from his father. Both are grounded in rationalism and humanism, on placing man above the God-man. Thus, Protestantism, in his view, is not a correction of papism, but its logical conclusion and final consequence. Ecumenism, which in Justin's time was gaining prominence as a movement for the unification of Christian churches, he regarded as the ultimate expression of this same humanistic spirit. He called it the pan-heresy, because it gathers together all heresies and deviations under a single banner of false unity. Ecumenism, he wrote, is the common name for all pseudo-Christianities and pseudo-churches of the West. All these pseudo-churches are nothing other than one great heresy, for in them man has replaced God with himself. For Justin, ecumenism represents not a return to truth, but a betrayal of it, a compromise with falsehood, an attempt to achieve unity at the expense of the absolute truth of Christ. In his Dogmatics of the Orthodox Church, Popović denounces the dogma of papal infallibility as the most tragic anthropocentric thought in the history of Christianity. In the Church of God, he argues, only Christ is infallible, for only he is the perfect God-man. To attribute infallibility to any human being is, in his view, a form of idolatry, the deification of man. The Church, he insists, cannot be built upon human authority, but only upon the holiness and truth of Christ himself. Thus, Roman Catholicism for him is not merely a theological error, but a spiritual tragedy, a transformation of the heavenly church into an earthly empire. Despite the severity of his criticism, Justin Popović never called for hatred toward individuals. His harsh words were directed at doctrines, not people. In his letters and spiritual writings, he emphasized that every Christian is obliged to love all men, but must never sacrifice the truth of Christ for the sake of false love. Genuine love, he maintained, never compromises truth. Rather, it bears witness to it with compassion and humility. He clearly distinguished between love for one's neighbor and the false tolerance that dilutes the gospel in the name of unity. More broadly, his critique of Catholicism, Protestantism, and Ecumenism was not an attack on persons or nations, but a protest against the ideology of secular humanism, which places man at the center of existence. For Justin, this is the essence of modern apostasy. The humanism without God that, in the name of progress and freedom, strips man of his true dignity. In contrast, orthodoxy, in his understanding, is not merely one of many Christian denominations, but the one, true, and complete Church of Christ, because only in it does Christ remain the unchanging center of all things. Everything in orthodoxy is the God-man Christ, and nothing without him, he wrote. Therefore, any attempt to modernize the faith, to compromise dogma, or to adapt the Church to the spirit of the age, he saw as spiritual death. Although his words may seem harsh, especially in an era that values dialogue and cooperation among churches, Justin's purpose was not to divide, but to warn. He did not see ecumenism as a dialogue of love, but as a danger of forgetting truth. His message was not to hate, but to remember Christ. In today's world of pluralism, globalization, and religious relativism, his voice sounds almost prophetic, a call to remain faithful to the person of Christ, to resist the temptation to turn truth into negotiation. For Justin, truth is not a democratic agreement nor a product of consensus. It is a person, the living Christ himself. As long as the church stands on Christ, it stands on truth. The moment it begins to rely on human power or intellect, it loses its spiritual foundation. The views of St. Justin Popović on Catholicism and Protestantism, though polemical and uncompromising, cannot be dismissed as mere intolerance. They form a coherent theological vision aimed at preserving the integrity of faith in a world of compromise. His thought, however controversial, remains a profound call to return to the sources, to Christ as the sole foundation of the Church and the only truth that saves. For him, Christianity is not an ideology nor a matter of institutional unity, but life in the truth of the God-man. Any form of faith that replaces him with man, whatever its name, ceases, in the end, to be truly Christian.